Welcome to Cybersecurity Under Pressure. Real attacks, real lessons. Every breach starts with something small. A trusted login, a missed alert, a system no one thought could matter. Here, we follow the incident. How it began, how it moved, what broke under pressure, and what security engineering and business teams should learn before the next one. Because the next attack will not wait for a perfect plan. Now, let's follow the evidence.
The auditor called yesterday. It wasn't to say congratulations.
Oh man, ouch.
Yeah, last night, right after that call, I was just trying to decompress. I walked into the kitchen to use my smart oven. Just a regular Thursday night. I'm trying to bake a potato. Like, nothing complex.
Right, just a basic potato.
Exactly. So I press the button, and the digital display just flashes this giant warning at me. It says, mandatory software update required. Estimated time, 45 minutes.
Oh, you're kidding me?
No, my oven completely locked me out. It refused to activate the heating element because it needed to download a patch for, I don't know, some theoretical Wi-Fi vulnerability in its operating system. And I just stood there looking at it, realizing that, well, we have entirely lost control of the hardware we own. I mean, it is completely subservient to the software update cycle.
Well, I hate to say it, but if you think a software update bricking your oven for 45 minutes is annoying, you are entirely unprepared for what European regulators have just done to the software inside your car.
Oh boy.
Yeah, because the days of your vehicle just being a physical machine sitting in your driveway, those are officially over. Your car is now a highly regulated node on a government network.
Which is exactly why we are pulling you, the listener, into this today. Welcome to a special deep dive into the, well, highly complex and honestly somewhat terrifying intersection of vehicle emissions and cybersecurity.
It's a wild combination.
It really is. You might think those are two completely separate engineering domains, right?
Right.
But they have just collided in a way that is going to fundamentally rewrite what it means to own or build or even drive a car over the next decade.
Yeah, it is a massive paradigm shift. I mean, we are looking at a regulatory web that essentially takes the physical exhaust pipe of your vehicle and wires it directly into cloud infrastructure.
And doing it with a level of digital surveillance that I don't think the automotive industry has ever seen before.
Never, not even close.
So let's unpack the exact mechanics of this, because I've been reviewing the August-September 2025 AECC newsletter. That's the Association for Emissions Control by Catalyst, for those keeping track, and they announced the publication of two new implementing regulations, specifically 2025-106 and 1707.
Right, the new Euro 7 technical rules.
Exactly. These form the specific technical rules for the Euro 7 standard. Now, Euro 7 applies to new vehicle types, specifically passenger cars and vans. So the M1 and N1 categories starting November 26, 2026.
Which is basically tomorrow in terms of automotive design cycle.
Right. So we are talking about a compliance cliff that is right around the corner. And, when I first looked at this, knowing the history of Euro standards, I sort of just assumed it was purely about tightening tailpipe limits.
Sure, just moving the goalposts a bit.
Yeah, like, smaller allowable mass fractions of nitrogen oxides or stricter particulate matter thresholds, maybe some new physical testing protocols for brake dust, just the usual environmental chemistry tightening.
But it is so much more than that, and we really need to correct that assumption right out of the gate. Euro 7 represents a massive pivot toward digital enforcement and telemetry.
It's not just chemistry anymore.
Not at all. It is no longer just about designing a cleaner combustion engine or like a better catalytic converter. It is about proving mathematically and digitally that the engine stays clean every single day it operates in the real world. Regulators aren't just looking at the exhaust anymore, they're looking at the code that manages the exhaust.
And to really grasp why this pivot to digital telemetry is happening right now, we have to look at the political backdrop in the sources. Because, it is incredibly tense out there.
The pressure is immense.
Yeah, the European Commission is under these immense, completely contradictory pressures. On one hand, you have Commission President Ursula von der Leyen giving her State of the Union address, and she's actively doubling down on the 2030 target to cut emissions by 55%.
Right, taking a very hard-line stance on decarbonization.
Exactly. Declaring very publicly that, quote, no matter what, the future is electric. But then, at the exact same time, you have the Draghi report discussions completely dominating the economic side of the commission.
Yeah, and the Draghi report injects a heavy, heavy dose of pragmatism into this whole thing. I mean, Mario Draghi is essentially pointing out that the decarbonization transition has to actually work economically.
Which is becoming a real struggle.
It is. He acknowledged that in sectors like the automotive industry, the previous regulatory targets were built on these rosy assumptions regarding supply chains, energy costs, and battery material availability. Assumptions that simply no longer hold true in the current geopolitical climate.
And you can see that economic anxiety spilling right over into the Competitiveness Council debates. I was reading the transcripts from those meetings, and the member states aren't just politely discussing climate science.
No, they're panicking.
They really are. They are talking about the sheer survival of the European automotive industry. They are terrified of unfair competition, specifically the influx of cheap electric vehicles from China.
Right, and they are practically begging the Commission for what they call technology neutrality.
Exactly. You've got Italy demanding strategies to avoid total dependence on China for battery minerals.
Yeah.
You've got Czechia and Austria pushing hard for CO-neutral synthetic fuels and plug-in hybrids to be legally protected under the new frameworks.
And Germany is in there calling for an overarching industrial strategy that removes rigid quotas on corporate fleets.
It is a full-blown internal crisis over how to regulate without destroying their own manufacturing base.
And, we have to impartially report on exactly where this political pressure is boiling over right now. Because according to the source material, a massive legislative block just occurred regarding the next big climate milestone.
The 2040 vote, right?
Yes. A vote was scheduled to set a binding 90% greenhouse gas reduction target for the year 2040, but 11 member states, spearheaded by France, Germany, Italy, and Poland, actually blocked the vote.
Wow, just outright blocked it.
They demanded it be postponed. And their stated reasons were severe competitiveness concerns and the very real threat of carbon leakage.
Carbon leakage, that's the economic term for when industries simply pack up their factories and relocate outside of Europe to avoid the regulatory burden, right?
Exactly. Now, we aren't taking a side on the climate targets here, obviously, but we're relaying this strictly to show the sheer political gravity and the incredible stakes surrounding any new environmental regulation in Europe right now.
So keeping that intense political friction in mind, I have to ask kind of a blunt pushback question here. Is this heavy-handed digital tracking in Euro 7 just a case of bureaucratic overreach to force a political agenda?
How so?
Well, on the surface, mandating that millions of cars constantly report their digital integrity to a government server, it feels like the EU just aggressively tightening the leash on an automotive industry they're already actively siding with.
It's a very logical question to ask when you see all that political context. But if we look at the pure technical reality detailed in these reports, this regulation isn't political overreach. It is a desperate, absolutely necessary response to a massive hidden technical problem.
A hidden problem.
Yes. Environmental regulators aren't demanding continuous telemetry because they inherently want to micromanage software engineers. They are doing it because the physical enforcement mechanisms of the past 50 years have completely systematically failed.
So meaning the old homologation process, the way we used to certify cars, is basically just security theater at this point.
Entirely. Think about the physical mechanics of how compliance used to work. A manufacturer designs a car, they bring a perfectly tuned golden sample prototype into a laboratory.
Right, under perfect conditions.
Exactly. They put it on a dynamometer, basically a treadmill for cars, and they run it through a highly controlled, standardized driving cycle. The ambient temperature is perfect, the fuel is pure, the tire pressure is exact.
And surprise, surprise, it passes the test.
Right, it passes. The government issues a type approval certificate, which is essentially a stamp that says, this model is legally clean. The manufacturer then scales up and builds 5 million of them.
And the ongoing enforcement is practically non-existent.
Pretty much. Maybe once a year, you take your car to a local mechanic for a smog check. They plug an OBD2 scanner into the port under the steering wheel, check that the check engine light isn't actively throwing a code, and you pass.
Right. It's just a snapshot methodology.
Yeah.
The logic is sort of, well, it was clean on a Tuesday in a sterile lab in 2018, so we just blindly assume it is still operating perfectly clean on a freezing Wednesday morning on the highway in 2026.
Exactly. But vehicles are no longer purely mechanical systems. They are complex, software-defined networks. Their emissions performance isn't just a byproduct of the physical size of the catalytic converter anymore.
It's governed by the code.
Yes, entirely. It's governed by dynamic calibration maps, the microsecond timing of the fuel injectors, the dosing algorithms for the AdBlue fluid, the thermal management logic in the engine control unit. And what regulators have slowly and painfully realized is that if emissions are controlled by software, they can be bypassed, modified, and defeated by software.
So the lab test is totally meaningless if the code just changes the second the car leaves the dealership.
Precisely. We are looking at a scenario where regulators are essentially attempting to design software compliance logic. And I mean, there's a real dark humor to this, honestly. You have career environmental lawyers, people who studied atmospheric chemistry and treaty law, now being forced to write cryptographic data requirements because they realize they've been comprehensively outsmarted by teenagers on car tuning forums.
Which brings us right to the actual reality of automotive tampering today and the sheer scale of that hidden technical problem you just mentioned. Because I'm looking at the numbers in these sources, and they are frankly staggering.
They really are.
We are looking at data pulled from the EU-funded DIAS project and from VCON's automotive threat intelligence reports. In 2022 alone, they estimated that 4 to 6 million Euro 6 and Euro 6 vehicles potentially faced tampering issues.
Just let that sink in. 4 to 6 million.
4 to 6 million. This isn't a rounding error. This isn't a couple of guys in a garage. And it gets crazier. In 2024, threat intelligence scans picked up almost 200 online discussions a day, specifically dedicated to manipulating after-treatment systems.
200 unique discussions a day across the clear, deep, and dark web. That is not a niche hobbyist community, you know? That is a global, industrialized black market for environmental bypasses.
So we need to break down exactly how this tampering has evolved, because as you said, it is no longer about a guy with an angle grinder unbolting a catalytic converter so his exhaust sounds more aggressive.
No, it is pure, highly sophisticated digital manipulation.
So we aren't talking about physical mechanical hacks anymore. The hardware is staying on the car.
Mostly, yes. The physical hardware often stays exactly where it is, but digitally, it is rendered inert. The sources cite very specific advanced methods. First, you have unauthorized ECU reflashing.
Okay, what does that actually look like?
That's when a tuner connects a laptop to the engine control unit and completely overwrites the hexadecimal calibration maps. They change the injection timing, they raise the turbo boost pressure, and they actively disable the software flags that would trigger an emissions failure.
So the car just ignores its own pollution.
Exactly. Then you have the proliferation of CAN bus emulators.
Okay, let's pause and explain the CAN bus for a second, because the architecture of that network is the reason this is even possible in the first place, right?
Right.
The controller area network.
Right. So the CAN bus was designed by Bosch back in the 1980s. The whole goal was to reduce the weight of copper wiring in cars. Instead of a dedicated wire for every single sensor running all the way back to the main computer, every component in the car communicates over a shared two-wire network.
It's a broadcast protocol, right?
Exactly. When the engine speed sensor wants to broadcast the RPM, it just yells it out onto the network. And whatever module needs that data just listens for it. But the critical flaw by modern standards is that the classic CAN bus inherently trusts every message.
There's no security.
None natively. There is no sender authentication, no encryption, no digital signatures.
So it's basically a giant group chat where anyone can pretend to be anyone else.
Precisely. So the tampering community exploits this by installing CAN bus emulators. These are tiny, cheap digital microcontrollers that they just splice directly into the network wiring harness.
And what do they do once they're spliced in?
The emulator just sits there and listens to the network traffic. When the engine control unit asks, hey, what is the status of the diesel particulate filter? The physical sensor might be trying to say, I'm completely clogged and destroyed.
But the emulator jumps in.
Right, the emulator intercepts that. It uses the priority arbitration of the CAN protocol to essentially talk over the real sensor, and it broadcasts a fake, perfectly healthy signal. Yeah, the central computer accepts the fake message as absolute truth, because it has no cryptographic way to prove otherwise. The engine runs perfectly, the diagnostic system reports 0 faults, but the physical emission system has been completely bypassed.
Which leads directly into the third method cited. Direct sensor spoofing. Wait, that's not right. People are actively hacking environmental sensors just to get a bit more horsepower.
Yeah, I mean, it's depressing, but yes. They are doing it for a fraction more horsepower, sure, but mostly they are doing it for economic reasons.
Economic, like saving money on fuel.
Fuel, yes, but mostly they are doing it to avoid paying for gallons of AdBlue urea fluid. They are doing it to bypass a €4,000 repair bill when an SCR catalyst degrades or a particulate filter clogs up. The economic incentive for a commercial trucker to cheat the system is massive.
You know, it's like putting a warm thumb on a digital thermostat in a house. The air conditioning unit outside is working perfectly, the internal logic of the HVAC system is flawless, but because the thermistor on the wall is being fed fake, localized heat from your thumb, the system just freezes the whole house.
That's a great analogy.
These tuners are basically just putting a digital thumb on the exhaust sensors. The car's computer thinks the exhaust is pristine, but in reality, the vehicle is dumping raw nitrogen oxides and soot directly out the tailpipe. It's just wild. You have these brilliant automotive engineers spending hundreds of millions of dollars in R&D to reduce NOx emissions by a fraction of a milligram per kilometer. And some guy with a $20 emulator and a laptop just wipes it all out in 5 minutes. It's like using cheat codes in a video game, except the consequences erase years of progress toward cleaner air.
And that infuriating reality is exactly what Euro 7 is mathematically designed to stop. Regulators finally realized they cannot trust the external diagnostic checks, and they definitely cannot trust the snapshot lab tests.
So what's their solution?
To combat this, the regulation introduces two major new internal architectures: onboard monitoring, or OBM, and onboard fuel and energy consumption monitoring, or OBFCM.
OBM and OBFCM.
Right. The paradigm has completely shifted. The vehicle is no longer just running a combustion engine. It is continuously, actively policing its own digital and physical integrity.
I really want to dig into the engineering reality of that OBM system because the details and the sources here are wild. According to the ITNA project data from TU Graz, that's Graz University of Technology in Austria, OBM isn't just a slightly smarter check engine light, is it? It is a fundamental redesign of how a car handles telemetry.
Oh, absolutely. It is continuous algorithmic telemetry. The OBM technology continuously measures and evaluates the performance of the emission control systems during normal, everyday operation.
So it's constantly doing math in the background.
Constantly, it utilizes complex physical models inside the engine control unit to look for early degradation of the catalyst, or crucially, it looks for the mathematical signatures of manipulation.
How does it spot manipulation if the sensors are lying?
It compares data streams, it compares the air intake mass against the fuel injection volume and the measured exhaust output. If the mass balance doesn't add up perfectly, it knows the sensors are being spoofed.
Because you can't fake physics.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. The car doesn't just keep this realization to itself, waiting for a mechanic to plug in a tool. Euro 7 mandates over-the-air, or OTA, data transmission.
So the car is actively calling home to report its own status.
Continuously. And the mechanics of this OTA transmission are incredibly specific and, frankly, fascinating. According to the TU Graz research, they had to design a highly optimized data structure to actually make this work in the real world.
Because sending live data all the time would be impossible.
Right. So, on average, every 64th trip you take in the vehicle is recorded into a secure OTA outbox in the car's memory. And they structure this so that an OBM data block contains exactly 5 trips.
Okay, let's break down the logic behind those specific numbers. Because if you are designing a surveillance system to catch emissions cheating, why 5 trips every 64th trip? Why not just stream the data live, second by second, over a 5G connection?
It comes down to the brutal realities of automotive engineering constraints.
Like cost.
Cost is a huge one. First, you have cellular bandwidth costs. Streaming live data from 40 million cars simultaneously would generate an astronomical cellular bill that the manufacturers would essentially have to eat.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Second, you have the physical limitations of the memory chips inside the car's gateway ECU.
The hardware itself can't handle it.
Right. If you constantly write and rewrite high-frequency data to embedded eMMC flash storage, you will physically burn out the memory sectors before the car's warranty even expires.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the flash memory degrading.
It's a massive issue in automotive IT. And third, there is the massive collision with GDPR and privacy laws.
Oh, of course, tracking.
Yeah, if a car streams every single trip second by second, the government can track exactly where you commute, when you drop your kids at school, what time you get home. It's a privacy nightmare. By batching 5 trips and only triggering a save every 64th trip, they apply a statistical smoothing effect.
So it anonymizes the routine a bit.
Exactly. It provides enough aggregated data to prove the fleet is compliant and the emission systems are working without providing a granular real-time tracking map of individual citizens.
That makes a lot of sense from a privacy and hardware perspective. But even with that data minimization, I mean, think about the sheer scale of the operation. Once Euro 7 is fully implemented across the entire European fleet, the TU Graz researchers ran the math on this.
The numbers are wild.
They estimate the annual OBM data volume at roughly 800 gigabytes. Now, to you or me, 800 gigabytes is just like a modern video game download or a hard drive of 4K movies.
Right, doesn't sound like much for a whole continent.
But this isn't video. This is pure, anonymized, heavily compressed telemetry text data. An 800 gigabyte database of tiny JSON payloads and binary hex strings represents an absolutely astronomical amount of network signaling.
It is a monumental data engineering challenge, and the researchers at TU Graz really had to sit down and figure out the architecture for how this data actually reaches the regulators without breaking the internet.
So what were the options?
Well, they ran a deep cost-benefit analysis on two distinct architectural options. Option one was a decentralized model, having the vehicle manufacturers send their fleet's OBM data to individual sovereign servers in each of the 27 member states. Those states would then process it and pass a summary up to the European Commission.
Look, I completely understand the political desire for member states to own their own data, but from an IT perspective, 27 different government IT systems, 27 different API standards, 27 different uptime SLAs, I mean, that is an administrative nightmare.
Which is exactly what the researchers concluded. The cost-benefit analysis proved that the decentralized model was hopelessly resource-intensive and would likely just collapse under its own administrative complexity.
So they went with option two.
Yes. The centralized solution won out. The regulation dictates that manufacturers will send the vehicle data directly to a singular, centralized EU Commission server infrastructure.
Just one giant database.
Yep. And they are going to do it using a REST API, representational state transfer, which is, the standard architectural style for web services.
I'm looking at this REST API requirement, and honestly, it feels like the European Commission just mandated the largest permanent distributed denial of service attack on themselves. I mean, millions of cars continuously pinging a central endpoint.
It's going to be a lot of traffic, yeah.
And think about the back-end nightmare this creates for the automotive manufacturers. They aren't just bending metal and tuning suspensions anymore. They are being forced to operate massive, enterprise-grade data pipelines just to maintain their legal right to sell cars. It's like every single car on the road is constantly testifying under oath to the EU.
That's a really good way to put it. And that actually highlights a brilliant, sobering insight from the NCC group source in our material. They point out a critical shift in the nature of evidence here.
What do you mean?
Well, the vehicle itself, the sensors, the code may generate the absolute truth about its emissions. But the ultimate challenge for the manufacturer is proving that truth to the regulator without making their own back-end cloud capacity economically unsustainable.
Right, because cloud computing isn't free.
Not at all. A homologation requirement, the fundamental legal requirement to sell the vehicle in Europe, has morphed from a physical engineering test into a cloud capacity, packet loss, and latency problem for the IT teams operating the powertrain telemetry.
So if the IT side fails, the car fails.
Exactly. If the REST API endpoint goes down or the cellular handshake drops too many packets, the car can't report its compliance. And if it can't report compliance, it's technically non-compliant.
And if the car is essentially testifying under oath to the EU through this API, how do we know the witness hasn't been bribed? I mean, it's one thing to collect this massive stream of data. It is another thing entirely to guarantee that the data hasn't been intercepted, modified, or completely fabricated by one of those CAN bus emulators we talked about earlier.
And this is exactly where environmental law crashes headfirst into cybersecurity law. The regulators know the telemetry is utterly worthless if the network is compromised. So Euro 7 physically integrates with UN regulation number 155.
Right, UNR 155. I saw this reference extensively in the sources alongside frameworks like the CSMS, SUMS, and TARA. And looking at UNR 155, the SEMS, the Software Update Management System, and the CSMS, the Cybersecurity Management System, I mean, these frameworks were originally designed for safety-critical systems.
Yes, entirely about safety.
They were built to ensure that a hacker couldn't intercept a software update and, remotely hijack the steering column or disable the brakes. But applying that exact same threat modeling to an AdBlue exhaust injector? That seems like an insane expansion of scope.
Can you give me a plain English translation here? Are they really legally equating a miscalibrated fuel map with a hijacked brake system?
Yes.
Yeah.
They absolutely are, and that is the true paradigm shift of Euro 7.
That's wild.
It is.
Yeah.
See, previously, automotive engineering was strictly siloed. You had your environmental engineers in one building worrying about tailpipe chemistry and catalyst light-off times, and you had your cybersecurity team in another building entirely, worrying about encryption keys and preventing malicious actors from steering the car off the road.
Two completely different worlds. Right. But Euro 7 violently tears down that wall. It explicitly states that a vulnerability in a software update process is no longer just a traditional cyber risk regarding privacy or safety. If a vulnerability in your OTA architecture allows a tuner to alter the engine's calibration, say, to reduce the AdBlue dosing rate, that cyber vulnerability is officially classified as an emissions offense.
Wow. So an insecure API endpoint on a manufacturer's server isn't just a data privacy issue that gets you a GDPR fine anymore. It is a direct violation of environmental homologation law. The legal liability just totally crosses domains.
Exactly. And because a liability crosses domains, the fundamental engineering methodology has to change too. The Vicone Threat Intelligence Report details the highly specific methodological differences between a standard UN R155 risk assessment and the new Euro 7 Annex 4th requirements.
How different are they?
Completely different. Under normal automotive cybersecurity rules, when engineers perform a TARA, a threat analysis and risk assessment, they use a complex, highly nuanced 8-class impact scale.
Right, weighing different factors.
Yeah, they evaluate a vulnerability based on a matrix of safety implications, financial impact to the driver, operational disruption, privacy leaks, and so on. Euro 7 looks at that 8-class scale and throws it completely out the window when it comes to emissions.
So how do they measure the risk if they aren't using the standard matrix?
They reduce the scale to a brutal binary metric, significant or insignificant.
Just black and white.
Yeah. And this metric is based purely, objectively, on measured emission deltas. The regulation defines the physical thresholds. The ECU is monitoring the physical output. If a software manipulation causes the vehicle's emissions to increase beyond a specific hard-coded margin, say, an extra fractional gram of nitrogen oxide per kilowatt hour, it instantly triggers the significant flag.
So it's completely outcome-based. It doesn't matter how elegant your cryptographic architecture is or how well you documented your risk mitigation strategy in a PDF. If the physical mass flow of NOx goes up because of a software flaw, you automatically fail the assessment.
Precisely. You fail. And it introduces an even more daunting concept: continuous assurance, or life cycle reporting.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, in the old days, regulators were satisfied with a snapshot factory test. You proved the system was secure on the day the car rolled off the assembly line, and you were done. But under Euro 7, they demand mathematical proof of resilience for the entire operational life of the car.
A whole lifespan.
Yeah. The initial certificate of compliance for your cyber management system is merely the starting line. For every new vehicle type, the granting authorities are going to demand answers to long-term operational questions.
Like what?
Like, how will you, the manufacturer, continue to prove that your cryptographic anti-tampering protections remain effective in Year 5? What exact telemetry evidence will you provide when random conformity checks are performed years after the initial approval?
You know, it's Friday, and I usually try to find the dark humor in complex engineering problems. But I just have this vivid mental image of a brilliant software engineer, like someone who went to university dreaming of writing cutting-edge machine learning code for autonomous driving or sensor fusion.
Right, the glamorous stuff.
Yeah, and now they are sitting in a windowless basement, sweating over whether a fractional timing glitch in a particulate sensor's secure boot sequence is going to result in a multi-million euro environmental non-compliance fine. I mean, they're being forced to carry the exact same burden of legal environmental compliance as the mechanical exhaust engineers.
It is absolutely a shared legal burden now, and it fundamentally alters how automotive companies have to structure their entire corporate hierarchies.
You can't be siloed anymore.
You simply cannot. The environmental engineering data and the cybersecurity governance logs have to be integrated into a single unified assurance case before the car is legally allowed to touch public asphalt.
All right, let's take all of this back-end infrastructure, the APIs, the tries, the encrypted OBM blocks, and let's look at the long-term reality of this, because it's not just happening invisibly in the cloud, right? It is going to be highly visible to the consumer.
Very visible, yes.
So Chapter 5 of this deep dive is entirely focused on the Environmental Vehicle Passport, or the EVP, which is mandated in Annex V of the Euro 7 regulations. And I was reading through the specific parameters that this passport is legally required to track, and it is granular to an almost absurd degree.
Granular is putting it mildly. The Environmental Vehicle Passport is a live, unalterable, rolling ledger of the vehicle's environmental soul.
Rolling ledger.
Yes, it tracks the exact physical degradation of the components over time.
Listen to just a few of these specific parameters that must be included. You've got NOx sensor concentration, tailpipe NOx mass flow modeled status,
Yep.
the hybrid battery state of charge and its long-term capacity fade, the active tampering status of the vehicle.
All of it, tracked constant.
It even rigidly tracks the OBM OTA outbox overwrite counter, which, if I'm understanding this right, means the car literally counts and reports how many times the internal memory buffer had to overwrite unsent data because it couldn't reach the server.
That is exactly what it means.
Why on earth does a regulator need to know the state of a memory buffer inside a specific car's ECU?
Because in the context of digital forensics, every single one of those esoteric data points is a potential indicator of malicious manipulation or hardware failure.
How so?
Let's take that overwrite counter you mentioned. If the OTA outbox is constantly overwriting its own data, it might just mean the car is parked in an underground garage with no cellular signal.
Which is innocent enough.
Right. But it could also mean that a tuner has intentionally installed a localized signal jammer. Or maybe they just severed the antenna wire to ensure the car can't report a massive emissions failure to the commission.
Ah, so it's an anomaly detection thing.
Exactly. And if the NOx mass flow modeled status, which is the engine's internal mathematical prediction of what the exhaust should look like, if that suddenly diverges drastically from the physical sensor concentration, it instantly indicates that the after-treatment system is either physically broken or has been bypassed by an emulator.
Because, as you said earlier, the math has to balance.
The math has to balance, and the regulation ensures this forensic data is incredibly accessible. Every single vehicle must feature a physical QR code that links directly to this passport.
And the rules around this QR code are incredibly strict. I noticed it has to follow ISO IX standard, the 800 4.2024.
Yeah.
And the sources note it must be visibly, legibly, and indelibly printed or engraved on the vehicle.
Engraved.
You can't just be a sticker.
No, it has to be indelible, and it must be accessible without disassembling any part of the vehicle. You cannot hide it behind a plastic trim panel or inside a locked glove box. It must be scannable. And that physical code links directly to the vehicle's live EVP data. There is no proprietary diagnostic software needed, no expensive dealership tools, no user registration required.
So anyone can check it.
Anyone, an inspector or even a secondhand buyer, can just scan it with a standard smartphone camera and instantly see the complete verified environmental health and tampering history of that specific car.
Okay, I have to interject here because one specific detail in Annex V jumped out at me, and it frankly blew my mind regarding the sheer timescale of this legislation.
The retention rules.
Yes, the regulation legally mandates that this EVP data and the infrastructure supporting it must be accessible for at least 20 years after the date of manufacture.
20 years.
20 years. I mean, think about the technology landscape 20 years ago. We were using flip phones and dial-up modems. If a vehicle is manufactured and type approved in 2027, the manufacturer is legally obligated to ensure that car can still transmit its encrypted OBM telemetry and display its passport in 2047.
It's a daunting timeline.
What happens to environmental compliance when the over-the-air transmission hardware, the 4G or 5G modems, physically soldered into the car, inevitably becomes obsolete? I mean, are telecom companies realistically still going to be operating legacy 5G networks in 2047 just to support Euro 7 telemetry?
It is a massive looming architectural challenge, but the regulators actually foresaw it. They built a specific failsafe into the legislation for exactly that scenario.
Really? How does that work?
Article 11 of the regulation explicitly states that when the transmission of OBM data from a group of vehicles is physically impaired due to the obsolescence of the over-the-air transmission hardware, like, say, a 4G network sunset, the manufacturer must immediately notify the granting type approval authority without delay.
So they have to self-report the obsolescence.
Yes. The Commission acknowledges that cellular technology will age out, but the legal obligation to monitor, report, and manage that aging process rests entirely, squarely on the shoulders of the automotive manufacturer.
They can't just ignore it.
Nope. They can't just shrug and say the network went down. They have to actively manage the obsolescence.
So bringing this all together, what does this vast regulatory web mean for you, the listener? Because this legislation doesn't just affect software engineers and bureaucrats in Brussels.
No, it affects everyone who touches a car.
Right. It permanently, fundamentally alters the core definition of car ownership. I mean, if you are buying a vehicle under Euro 7, you are no longer just buying a machine to get from point A to point B. You are buying an active node in a continent-wide environmental compliance network.
Exactly.
Your vehicle's ability to legally operate on public roads is inextricably tied to its ability to securely, continuously report its own data. If you are a developer writing the software for these systems, your code is now subject to strict environmental enforcement law.
Which is a whole new world for developers.
And if you are managing a corporate fleet, you aren't just tracking tire rotations and oil changes anymore, are you? You are managing a massive, rolling fleet of cryptographic keys, API latency SLAs, and digital compliance certificates.
It forces us to ask a really difficult, unresolved question about the future of mobility.
Us now.
Well, we've talked extensively about the pristine conditions of the laboratory. We've talked about the massive REST APIs in the cloud and the QR codes in the showroom. But if a vehicle's legal right to be on the road is now entirely fundamentally dependent on encrypted digital certificates and live continuous cellular telemetry, what actually happens to the secondhand car market when a 15-year-old vehicle's digital security architecture simply ages out of support?
Wow. That is a genuinely chilling thought for the automotive economy. I mean, you could have a car with a perfectly functioning combustion engine, pristine catalytic converters, and perfect physical mechanics. But if the cryptographic security certificate for its software update system expires, or the manufacturer goes out of business and drops support for the specific cloud API it needs to report to the EU, does the car just become a 2-ton brick?
It might.
Does it suddenly become illegal to drive to the grocery store simply because it can no longer mathematically prove to a server in Brussels that its firmware hasn't been tampered with? That is the kind of existential engineering problem I am going to be pondering all weekend.
It is the ultimate collision of physical, mechanical longevity and digital cryptographic obsolescence. And the automotive industry is standing right at ground zero of that impact.
Well, on that rather heavy existential note about the future of everything we drive, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. That's all for this episode of Cybersecurity Under Pressure. Real attacks, real lessons. Check your systems. Check your assumptions. And maybe, just maybe, question whether what you trusted yesterday is still trustable today. See you in the next chapter.
You have been listening to Cybersecurity Under Pressure. Real attacks, real lessons. Real incidents leave real lessons. Stay prepared. Stay critical. And keep following the evidence.